So I think maybe we can start with just how you when you look at this SPS graph. I'll switch over to your screen. Uh,
Mhm.
what goes through your mind? Like how do you approach this graph, and what's your moves at this point?
Um, typically, typically the very first thing that I always do is I go general to specific. So meaning wider time frames first. Like let's say I check it on a daily,
Yeah.
and then if there's nothing significant here, then I go on lower time frames. The good thing about daily is it gives a very good broad perspective about where the market is going, where the momentum is.
Right. So now we're at
Lower,
we're at daily
hmm,
right now.
that's right.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
then typically I go to lower time frames because that's where we can draw the lines. So I think one of the things that beginner technical analysts learn, or if you watch a lot of content with regards to technical analysis, they always draw lines.
Mm-hmm.
Um, these lines are of course imaginary,
Yeah.
but the the funny thing about this is technical analysis is a bit paradoxical, or it's a bit self fulfilling.
Yeah.
So everyone sees the same thing and operates on the same rules in terms of it's the same indicators or whatnot.
Right.
So because everybody does it, the way they trade or invest now adheres to the same principles. So let's say my trend lines are not as perfect as you would like it to be,
Yeah.
but there's a clean break. Anybody who has drawn their lines in a similar manner will have seen this clean break.
Yeah.
And then you have all of these cascading momentum to buy. So that's a funny quirk about technical analysis. But let me jump back. So the way I typically do it is once we go on lower time frames, I try to see what's going on. Then there's always a list of indicators that I go to. Like for example, RSI is one of the major ones that I look for.
Okay.
Um,
And for people
uh,
who don't know, what's RSI?
so RSI is really just an indicator whether an asset is overbought or oversold.
Okay.
So anything above 80-ish is oversold. Anything below 30 is like sorry, overbought is here above, oversold is below. Um,
Okay. So
because this is where
if something is overbought, it's probably overvalued, right?
that's right. This is where we start to see like if something is very overbought, then you can already predict that something a sell-off will be happening soon. Like for
Mm.
example, let me give you this example. I think this is when we peaked at $1 few weeks ago.
Yeah.
So everyone was had a mad rush to $1.
Mm.
The RSI was very oversold.
Right.
So you kind of can already expect okay a correction is going to take place, and pretty much that has been the case so far. Um, but yeah, so that's how I do it. So there's always a general view,
Mm.
and then try to go on lower time frames to see okay what do I see because there are certain patterns in play. Like for example, when I first started the blog, we were here, so we were around here dealing with this
Mm.
um, broadening descending wedge is what most technical analysts call it.
Yeah.
The reason is, of course, it's broadening, so it's widening. This tends to be a bullish pattern, so there's a high probability that this is a bullish pattern, but only when you break it. So
Okay.
throughout the week, we have been tracking pretty much when we're gonna break this. So
So
now it broke.
so you say
Go ahead.
that it's a bullish pattern even though it's going downwards.
That's right.
So how do you determine that? Like what in this downward trend do you see as bullish?
So this is where you start to see like what the overarching time frames are. So we know. So typically when trading any asset, there's always a cycle of being overbought and then you have a correction. So then you have a rally up and then you have a
Mm.
correction. You have a rally up and then a correction.
Right.
When we know that a particular um, asset class. So let's say we know that crypto is all going up. We can safely assume that any asset in the space that has a very healthy community, that has good economics, good tokenomics, etc.,
Yeah.
will eventually lead to just, we can be deterministic about the asset going up.
Right.
So, for
So
example,
Splinterlands falls in that category, right?
that's right. Otherwise, I would have bolted a long time ago.
Yeah.
So, so we knew that over the past month or so, after a low of 20 cents ish, we rallied all the way up to $1.
Mm. Yeah.
That is very unsustainable. So after a while, a lot of people, regardless of who you are, you could be a player, you could even be the game dev, you can be, like just a trader or a regular investor.
Yeah.
Some people will realize profits. And this is where we are now. So we are in the process of a correction
Mm.
because basically it's people realizing the profits that they gained when they were down here,
Yeah.
or those who panic sold as well. So they were, and typically this leads to accumulation. So we know that during a corrective phase, this is where people are sort of buying it again. So as people are starting to sell, eventually you start to see, hey, this price is low enough for me to be very comfortable with buying it again.
Okay.
And so this is always the question. So whenever we have a rise up and then it's a correction, it's always a question of, okay, how do we know when we have reached the bottom? I think that's always the question that a lot of people always ask.
Yeah.
But that is actually the wrong question to ask because we will never know that. Because if we all know when things go top and things go bottom, we'll all be rich by now.
Yeah.
we, we won't even need to have this conversation. I won't even need to have this conversation. I'll be sailing in a yacht somewhere.
Yeah.
Um, so when we look at patterns, uh, a good technical analyst does not predict the bottom. So instead, what we do is we try to see when the momentum has shifted
Okay.
instead, or when a trend is broken.
Mm.
So let's say for this broadening descending wedge that I was talking about, yes, it's going down, but um, it's not about me saying that it's bullish. I'm saying it's bullish only if you break it on the upside.
Okay.
So if you rally past the line,
Mm.
then you know there has been a momentum shift.
Okay.
And this pattern now is invalidated pretty much. So the way a lot of technical analysts work is they try to find the pattern, try to see how the momentum will shift, change, or continue.
Mm.
And if it changes, then that pattern is invalidated, and we move on to the next one. So
Right.
so like for example, these two lines are no longer relevant to me because now I'm focused on, okay, what's happening here now.
Okay.
Because in the past couple of days, what happened was after like free falling, we appeared to find the bottom here, which is around 40 49 48 cents, which I also called, not tooting my own horn here, but but anyway, so we broke this. So we sort of invalidated this pattern now. We can move on with our lives. And now what's happening? Unfortunately, it's another broadening wedge here. So,
Yeah.
we have gone back to the channel.
Yeah.
But um, so this is how we sort of operate. It's always like pattern, invalidated. All right, let's move on. Pattern, is this going to be invalidated today, later, tomorrow? Let's see. Um, but otherwise, like let's say for SPS's case, right now we appear to really have good support here at around 48 cents ish. But again, we will only continue on a bullish momentum when, or if we break again this upper trend line that you start to see existing. It's like
Mm.
the price is hitting its head as it moves down. Like what's
Right.
going on? So this is now what we're trying to break.
So can you draw any conclusions? Like you said that the old pattern is invalidated.
Mhm.
Can you draw any conclusions from like the amount of time it took for the pattern to be invalidated? So, for example, let's say that the old pattern, the
Yep.
yeah, that pattern was for 2 days,
Mhm.
can you like draw any conclusions on the next pattern that it's probably going to be 2 days as well, or is that like completely random?
We don't normally go by time.
Okay.
What I tend to do is because the when is kind of irrelevant because at the end of the day, it's where the price is.
Mm.
So if it moons to $2 tomorrow, I'd be the happiest man in the world. I don't really care if it took me like 10 days or two
No.
days. Um, but one of the things that we look at often is for any asset, um, any asset that's traded in the open market. What tends to happen is you stare at the chart long enough, and that that asset develops its own unique personality as it goes on. So
Okay.
let me give you an example.
Yeah.
So SPS is around 90 plus days old now, right? It's let me delete these first.
Yeah.
So SPS is 90 plus days old now. So it's 3 months. Not a lot of time to really draw conclusions, but there are a few patterns that we have seen play out. So one thing is the thing about SPS for some reason, whenever it tries to rally, every time it corrects, it really goes back to the same level as before.
Mm.
This is something that's actually unique to SPS that I've seen. It doesn't really exist in others. See, it always just goes back to where it once was.
Yeah.
So that's like, all right. So now that it's sort of developed this weird quirk about it, so you can even look at it at a wider time frame. Look at what happens when we begin to rally hard. Somehow, when you look at SPS, it develops this weird pattern of just coming back to where it came from.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's the same here. So how do I know that this is a very strong support? It's because when we rallied, we fell back to the same exact price level, very similar to the others before we continue. That doesn't mean that it's not going to break down. I mean, there's always a possibility that that SPS will continue to go lower and all that. But at least for now, this token really has a unique quirk um, that has sort of played out over the past 90 days so far.
Right. So this, I mean, if we think about SPS or like any currency in a broader manner, I mean, there's small cap and I guess large cap
Yep.
coins.
Mhm.
How valid is if you compare technical analysis on, for example, Tesla and on SPS? Like, is
Yep.
there something to be said about how valid a technical analysis is? If you get what I mean?
Yep. I understand. Um, the only difference between let's not take Tesla because Tesla's a stock, so it
Yeah.
goes up very slowly. Um, let's compare Bitcoin and SPS, for example. The main difference between Bitcoin and SPS is because SPS is a micro cap or a small cap,
Yeah.
it tends to be prone to a lot more volatility because it's easier to move.
Yeah.
So, for example, if a billionaire comes, like a billionaire comes in tomorrow, buys all of the SPS, you'd see the asset shoot up to astronomical levels.
Yeah.
But for Bitcoin, the same billionaire comes and buys all of the Bitcoin. Bitcoin only moves maybe like 1%.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. The difference is more so the potential upside of a particular asset, like SPS. So because we know that the market cap of SPS is low, there's a lot of potential to the upside
Yeah.
as compared to something like Bitcoin, which has limited upside. But with it comes risk, though. So the way I look at it, that's why while I love SP Splinterlands, uh, this only takes up maybe less than 10% of my portfolio because again, I have to assess the risk of
Yeah.
this going to zero versus a more secure asset in crypto like Bitcoin, for example.